Abyssal, Murmurs. In this splendid city, whenever the haunted apartment building is mentioned, everyone knows exactly where it is. But there are probably only a few who truly know the real story behind it. I didn't know either until my older sister, who lives nearby, shared it with me. I'll recount everything just as I heard it, so everyone can hear the tale. That year, Mr. Zheng Liu had the opportunity to travel here, and with the eyes of a businessman, he saw that the spacious plot of land would make him a fortune. Without hesitation, upon returning to his country, the Chinese are very meticulous about worship and offerings, as they believe that whatever they do, having faith in the spiritual realm, will lead to resounding success. After acquiring the land, Zheng Liu was so thorough that he hired several excavators to dig deep down 5 meters into the soil. The purpose was to see whether there were any remains buried beneath. Even though he had consulted many skilled masters, he still wanted to dig to be sure. Being careful doesn't hurt, especially when constructing a project that costs billions. A small oversight could lead to disaster. After digging, Zheng Liu chose an auspicious day to lay the foundation. It was an extremely large and sturdy foundation, consisting of 17 columns, which, according to Chinese belief, the number 7 signifies development. This morning, on a good day of the month, all workers had to arrive here as early as 2 or 3 a.m. because the large structure with many columns needed to be completed before the heat set in. Among them was a young worker named Harold, who was still quite young. While preparing, one of his co-workers asked him, "Have you eaten yet?" "I had a pack of noodles and a cup of coffee." Harold replied, "I had leftover rice from yesterday. I fried it up this morning and also had a cup of coffee. When we finish work, let's go to Sream for some noodles." "All right, just remember to pay me back when you get your salary. I'll send it home for my mother's medicine." "Yeah, I know." After that, they continued working. Everything was ready, and the tall concrete pipes were brought down. Plaster flowed through the pipes accordingly. Everything was progressing smoothly until Harold's friend suddenly shouted, "Harold! Harold!" The noise from machines was loud, and the area became chaotic. When the machines were turned off, they found Harold's body lying in the huge foundation pit. When his friend saw Harold fall, he tripped on the rebar and got injured. The incident quickly reached Mr. Zheng Liu, who ordered the work to continue. Some workers protested, "Stop work immediately. Someone has died in there." The manager then translated what Mr. Zheng Liu said. "Never mind. We'll deal with that later. Stopping now would ruin the entire project. The director will provide adequate compensation. After all, workplace accidents are unavoidable." Everyone felt that this was reasonable. After all, a life had been lost, and being buried in that massive chunk of concrete, who could survive? Besides, it was a matter for the director. The workers were just focused on earning their money. They continued working, while Harold's friend sat paralyzed, beginning to space out. As work slowed down, the manager finally let some of the workers go, in order to avoid drawing attention to the situation. Once everyone had left, Mr. Zheng Liu and the manager dealt with the problem. The manager asked, "What should we do now, boss?" Mr. Zheng Liu looked at Harold's foot sticking out and felt frustrated. It was either completely buried or completely outside, but with it jutting out like this, it was truly difficult to handle. Mr. Zheng Liu then spoke. "All right, you go home. I will have someone else take care of the rest. I'll have this body taken care of by a sorcerer. You ask for the address, and then I'll send the body back to their family with $5,000. Yes, I understand, boss. After that, they left, and finally, the family received the cremated remains and the sum of $5,000. Who knows what's inside the urn? Of course, those who engage in big business have their own motives. That night, I drove to the construction site, and when I arrived at the gate, the security guard looked out and asked, "Where are you going at this hour, boss?" "Ah, I'm just stopping by for a bit." "Have you had dinner yet?" "I'm about to go eat." "Well, you go eat, and I'll finish my work. By the time you're done eating, I'll be ready to head back." "Yes, yes." The guard hurriedly ran away and then closed the construction gate. Mr. Zheng Liu ran straight to his destination, carrying a machete, odor-neutralizing alcohol, and a flashlight. After looking around and seeing that there was no one, he finally picked up the goods and walked over to Harold's body. It's only been 2 days, but the body shows signs of decomposition, and the smell is quite strong, mingling with the scent of the fresh incense. Mr. Zheng Liu began to take out the machete to chop. The first strike wasn't too bad, but with the second strike, he stopped, ran outside, and vomited. The smell of the corpse is even more pungent and foul. Even 3 masks can't block it out. He blurted out a curse. Damn it, even in death, they still torment others. Do you have any idea how much money I've poured into this project? The kind of lowly labor. After venting his frustrations, Mr. Zheng Liu continued to get the job done. The regular blows of the axe came down, and dark liquid splattered out, hitting his face and shirt. The more he got angry, the angrier he became, and the angrier he got, the more he worked fervently, with maggots and bits of flesh falling down in a flurry. Finally, he finished it. He stood there panting for a moment before putting the severed leg into a black plastic bag. Quickly mix some mortar and spread it over that spot. The pillar looks a bit uneven, but it looks quite good overall. After finishing his work, he used the alcohol he had brought to wash his hands and face. And while he was at it, he also cleaned up the spots where flesh and bones had fallen. Let's just clean up what is called the crime scene. After putting everything in the back of the car, Mr. Zheng Liu drove towards the gate, where the security guard had returned from his meal some time ago. Mr. Zheng Liu warmly asked, "Have you eaten yet?" "I just got back, and since I saw the boss still inside, I didn't call." "Well, I'm heading back now. Please lock the gate." "Yes, hello, boss." The car sped away, and the security guard watched it for a moment before turning his face back to the empty construction site. There's no one here, but I can still hear the sound of unjust crying somewhere. The uncle quietly entered to take the incense nearby, and then prayed. "I'm just an employee. If someone owes a debt, they should find the person they owe it to and pay them." Sticking the incense into the ground, the security guard went into the small room by the gate and turned on his phone to listen to music. Mr. Zheng Liu, after finishing his work, drove out to the quiet stretch of the river, throw the whole bag and tools into the river, and consider it done with that burden. When the nails and pillars dried, the workers returned to their usual tasks, and the work became bustling and noisy again, with no one paying attention to the workers who had died unjustly anymore. Walter works as a laborer here, and today he just ran to the restroom on the upper floor to take a dump. When I walked in, there was no one there, but just as I closed the bathroom door, I heard a clattering sound. Clatter, clatter. I just thought that Chad was teasing too, because he often teases Walter a lot. Walter called out, "Is it Chad?" Outside, no one answered. Walter thought it probably wasn't Chad. The clattering sound kept up steadily, but after listening a bit longer, It seemed more like the sound of a limping footstep. He thought, "Strange, there's no one at my workplace who limps. Chad, I know it's you. Don't mess with me." Walter was still convinced Chad was playing a prank, so he felt reassured and continued his business. The footsteps grew increasingly closer, heading toward the restroom door. Walter intended to spray some water through the gap below the door as a prank to make Chad wet. But when he saw a foot with only one leg, Walter furrowed his brow and thought, there's no one here missing a leg." Then a strong noise banged against the door. Something alarming made Walter freeze, unable to continue. Quietly, he listened as the noise moved steadily up the door, his eyes following along. Above the restroom door was a head peering in more accurately. It was a ghost, with wide open eyes. Its hair, face, and skin were matted with blood, and a bit mangled, the eyes staring intently without saying a word. After seeing that, Walter turned pale, hurriedly yanked up his pants, and bolted out of the restroom. Ghost. There's a ghost with one leg. The ghost then turned its face to follow him, behind its mangled head, its sad eyes looking on. "Home. I want to go home. I'm cold, It turned out the pillar where worker Harold fell was exactly where this restroom was being built. Seeing Walter sprint out with his pants in tow, his co-workers teased him. "What were you doing to be in such a hurry?" Walter, panting and breathless, recounted, There's a ghost with one leg." Chad came closer and sniffed Walter. "Yikes, it's so smelly. Don't tell me you finished your business without wiping." Walter nodded vigorously, and the crew spread out a bit. Walter quickly pulled up his pants and continued. There's really a ghost. Its face looked terrible, and it didn't have a leg." Everyone burst into laughter at Walter's fright. But someone voiced, "I've heard that this site has a story. A worker really died and was buried in that pillar. How could that be? If there was an accident, they would have stopped to retrieve the body." "How can they stop? Do you have any idea how much this pillar costs?" "Billions. If they stop, how can they continue pouring?" Another person questioned, "But if a worker is missing a leg, how could they even work?" "Someone missing a leg wouldn't be able to carry anything. It must be a different ghost." Chad then slapped Walter on the back. "Come on, you're just being a big scaredy cat. A man should be brave, especially during the day. Now go wash up and let's grab some lunch." "Wait for me a moment." Walter ran to the faucet, took off his pants, switched to shorts, and washed himself. After that, he slipped on his pants again and left, planning to head to the eatery and air them out afterward. When Walter had seen the ghost of Harold, it was already noon, with the sun right overhead. Chad was quite brave. He did not believe in ghosts or spirits. Many times he thought he had seen something, but he just dismissed it as a trick of his eyes, insisting that there was no such thing as ghosts in the world. Over time, Chad continued to use that restroom. In fact, he went there regularly without any issues. However, one beautiful day, while he was in the middle of a heavy duty, he heard some rustling and the sound of dragging slippers outside. He assumed it was Vivian, the cleaner, and teased. "Vivian, aren't you afraid of the smell?" "I'm in the middle of a heavy one here." Chad chuckled to himself, thinking that Vivian would surely scold him loudly in response. He often joked with her, knowing she had a lot to say, and he did this to amuse her. But after waiting a while and not hearing her usual scold, Chad found it strange. He asked again, "Vivian, are you being quiet today?" In reply, he only heard a faint sound. The was very soft, very gentle. Then the rustling stopped entirely. After finishing his business, Chad washed his hands thoroughly and went outside. When he arrived, he asked his colleagues, "Is Vivian taking a break today?" I teased her, but she only replied with a light As Chad was laughing to himself, someone chimed in. "Which Vivian are you talking about? She's been sick for a whole week and hasn't come to work." "Huh. Then who cleaned the restroom so well?" "No one has cleaned it. It has been like that since a while ago." Chad began to feel uneasy. So where did those rustling sounds come from? And who answered him? Little did he know, since the rumors of a ghost had circulated, no one dared to use that restroom anymore. Just like someone who's never encountered a ghost would be fearless, he boldly thought that they would let him meet them once so he would know they exist. The construction site had been set up for 3 months, and that evening, Chad stayed a bit later than usual to collect some scrap metal to take home. The sky was already dimming with dusk, and the site's lights were hazy and faint at that moment. While he was busy picking up pieces of scrap metal to put into a burlap sack, he suddenly saw someone crouching like himself. This site was large, and of course, there would be others scavenging for scrap just like him. So Chad stood up and asked loudly, "Are you picking up too?" That person paused upon hearing Chad's voice, stood frozen for a few seconds, then resumed searching. Noticing that the person didn't respond, Chad thought that maybe they were too haughty to talk. He shrugged it off and continued picking up the metal, getting closer to that figure. He observed that the figure wasn't picking anything up but was searching for something instead. Chad spoke up again. "Hey, looking for something. Do you need me to help find it?" The figure turned to him with a sad look in its eyes and face. Then it finally spoke, its voice carrying a chilling tone filled with sorrow. My legs, where are my legs? Haha." Chad felt a chill run down his spine, sensing that something was off. The person was moving towards him, walking through the large metal beams, passing through the concrete steps. Dressed in old, tattered work clothes, with something matted on its head, it drew closer to him while crying, "My legs, where? How can I go home?" The person moved faster towards Chad, and at that moment, he finally felt fear. In a panic, he threw down the sack of scrap he'd been collecting and ran, yelling, "Ghost! There's a ghost with no legs." He dashed outside, where there weren't many people left. Looking pale, sweat pouring down his forehead, and a frantic expression on his face, the few remaining onlookers teased, "Did you see a ghost, man?" "Really? I really saw a ghost with no legs." They stopped teasing and glanced into the site, then whispered, "So now you believe it. There used to be a worker who died here, fell from that concrete pillar. Just don't understand why he's missing his legs. Let's go. We'll bring some incense to light for him tomorrow." Everyone quickly left. Chad, despite regretting the scrap sack, dared not return to retrieve it. It was the first time in his life he had seen a ghost so clearly. From now on, he wouldn't dare to disbelieve there were really ghosts in this world. When everyone had departed, the security guard only stayed at his small post outside. Since learning about the incident, he hadn't dared to enter. He wore headphones at night, as he couldn't stand the sound of crying that echoed every night. At that moment, the ghost of Harold continued relentlessly searching for his legs, starving and cold as no one honored him with offerings. The rumors about the ghost left Mr. Zheng Liu anxious. If this continued, his billion-dollar project would hardly be completed. He returned to his home country, seeking a master in the ways of the spirit world to plead for help. "Master, this is the situation. What should I do?" The master, a small man of Chinese descent with a pointed mouth and slanted eyes, looked like a mouse. He calmly sat and talked with Mr. Zheng Liu. "Just perform a spiritual sealing. What's so difficult about that?" "How do you perform the sealing?" "I'll pay any amount for your guidance." "It depends on your intention. Let's see what your heart holds." Without hesitation, Zheng Liu immediately took out 5 crisp $100 bills and placed them on the plate. On the plate was a golden turtle shell, and the sorcerer chuckled silently to himself upon seeing it. Zheng Liu earnestly prayed, "Once the work is done, I will pay back 10 times this amount." The sorcerer further remarked, "I can't accept it just yet, as the Lubin talisman is quite tricky. I'm just worried you won't be able to pull it off." "I can do it. I will do it. I definitely can do it." The sorcerer then leaned close and whispered into Zheng Liu's ear. Each word slipped through his ears, and Zheng Liu's calm expression quickly turned into one of frenzy. It was unclear what the sorcerer had said, but Zheng Liu felt his mind racing with many plans. Zheng Liu quickly sought out a new girlfriend, spending lavishly and making grand promises. The girl was Sophia, a first-year banking university student who was also very skilled in dancing, a passion of hers. Coming from a poor background, to study in the city, Sophia needed a substantial amount of money. Though she was from a rural area, she was hesitant to take on heavy labor and quickly resorted to the easier line of work as a hostess. Just a few days into her new job, she met Zheng Liu, who treated her like a sugar daddy. Notably, he did not demand any intimate relations, saying to her, "I don't want to have relations before marriage. Although I am older, I still wish to bring home a pure daughter-in-law for my parents. My family has a villa, so there is no back door." Sophia smiled outwardly, but in her heart she was thrilled. She couldn't believe her luck in landing such a generous partner. Zheng Liu continued, "Tomorrow, come with me to the hospital. I want to get a virginity examination." "Sure, that's easy. But my phone is broken, and I'm afraid you won't be able to call me tomorrow." "Don't worry, I'll take you to buy a new phone later. That won't be an issue." Sophia hugged Zheng Liu tightly and kissed him several times. "Thank you. You are so good to me. I love you so much." The next day, Zheng Liu took Sophia for the virginity examination, and he didn't forget to remind the medical staff there to be careful for him. After waiting for more than 30 minutes, Zheng Liu received a report that pleased him greatly. Sophia, seeing his expression, took the opportunity to ask for something. "See, I'm still a virgin and you didn't believe me. I just want to make sure my parents won't be disappointed. Now let's go buy a necklace." "That's fine. Just consider it a compensation for me." Sophia linked her arm with Zheng Liu's and left, heading straight to the jewelry counter. Just 5 days later, Zheng Liu brought Sophia to Vietnam. They rented a hotel not too far away, and for the first 2 days, he took her out to eat and visit everywhere. After that, he led her to his construction site, still unfinished. That day, she stayed inside the car. When the guards saw the boss's car, they opened the gate, unaware of who was inside. They arrived at a block under construction, entered a room measuring 30x, where Zheng Liu pointed out the window. "Look, later there will be 3 towering apartment buildings built here, and then we can just sit back and count the money we make." "That sounds amazing, dear." Then Mr. Zheng Liu took out the wedding ring and proposed to Sophia. "Take me, okay?" Sophia was truly surprised. Before coming here, Mr. Zheng Liu said she was wearing a red dress like a wedding gown, and her shoes were also red. She doesn't think he said that doing it that way was his proposal to her. Sophia raised her hands to cover her mouth in surprise, thinking to herself, my time has come. In the past, the fortune teller said that you had the fate of a noblewoman, but you didn't believe it. Now that it has come true, you really believe it now. Sophia reached out her hand and said loudly, I agree, I agree. Mr. Zheng Liu slipped the ring onto her finger, and she joyfully raised her hand to admire the large diamond. After that, he asked her to dance for him. Sophia then performed her favorite dance, and after finishing, she drank the water that Mr. Zheng Liu had offered. Just a few minutes later, Sophia felt dizzy. Her vision blurred, and her legs could no longer support her. She hesitated. I'm feeling really uncomfortable. Sophia fell over, but fortunately, Mr. Zheng Liu caught her just in time. He just pulled her to a corner of the room, took some rope and tape, tied her hands, and covered her mouth. While you're at it, take the new ring I just put on her, the necklace, and even the phone, too. Before silencing her, Mr. Zheng Liu put a small piece of mugwort into Sophia's mouth. Then he closed the door, locked it, and left. Sophia cried in fear, but made no sound. Everything was just stuck in her throat. To prevent Sophia from being scared to death, he also left behind a small flashlight. When I finished work and went outside, I immediately ran into the security guard, Mr. Zheng Liu, who reminded me, please, don't go up there. I'm setting up an altar to invite the spirits. Yes, I understand. After that, Mr. Zheng Liu drove away, and the security guard quietly closed the door. To be honest, even if you offered him money, he wouldn't dare to go in there. He's quite old, and it's not easy for someone his age to find a job like this. So he definitely won't dare to take the risk. Many thefts have happened here, but basically nothing has been stolen. Perhaps the thieves were scared off and ran away without their shoes. Every time, Mr. Zheng Liu will bring food and drinks to Sophia on time. When he arrives, he will let her go to the bathroom first, and only then will he give her something to eat and drink. When she pulled the tape off her mouth, Sophia quickly shouted loudly in her native Chinese, "Help me! Is anyone there? Help me!" Mr. Zheng Liu appeared annoyed, his eyes rolling, as he grabbed Sophia's hair and pulled it back. "Go ahead, shout even louder. Let's see who comes to save you. Come on, let's go." Sophia's face was full of fear as she pleaded, "Let me go. I will do anything you want. Just let me go. The kind of easy woman like you is the type I hate the most in life. You thought it would be easy to take my money, huh, you bastard? I'm begging you. I was wrong. I was really wrong. I still have my parents back home. Please, forgive me." Without saying anything more, Mr. Zheng Liu fed Sophia, then gave her the mugwort to chew on and continued to tie her up. Exactly 3 days later, Mr. Zheng Liu took a small knife and began to make several cuts on Sophia's body to let the blood flow into a bucket. Sophia was in so much pain, she wished she could just die, but she was tied up and gagged, leaving her with no way to escape that fate, only knowing to silently endure the cuts that slice into the flesh. Mr. Zheng Liu cut it like that 4 times, just enough to water the 4 corners of the construction site. When I turned back, I saw Sophia gasping for breath, blood still flowing from her body, soaking the floor. Fortunately, When we started the process, I pulled Sophia into the bathroom. This time, Mr. Zheng Liu held a sharp knife, plunging it straight into Sophia's heart. She died with her eyes wide open, still staring at him with a fixed gaze. Cold-blooded, Mr. Zheng Liu used the sharp knife to gouge out Sophia's 2 eyes, then took out a small box, inside which contained some talismanic herbs only he knew about. Ignoring Sophia's corpse lying there, he hurriedly left, carrying her eyes to bury them. This was the type of talisman the shaman had instructed Mr. Zheng Liu on. He just needed to let the virgin girl keep the herbs in her mouth for 3 days so that the herbs would seep into her blood. After that, he would sprinkle live blood onto the 4 corners of the construction site. And the final step was to dig out a few pairs of eyes to bury so that no one would find them. The spirit of the virgin girl would suppress the spirit of the unfortunate worker, allowing the owner of the place to prosper. After finishing the suppression ritual, Mr. Zheng Liu took out some alcohol to drink and some drugs to smoke. He tried to sit for a moment to calm himself down. Once he regained his composure, he took an axe to dismember the corpse. The body had only been dead for about an hour, but was already showing signs of rigor mortis. So Mr. Zheng Liu had to chop hard to break apart the corpse. Blood splattered everywhere, not to mention bits of flesh and bone that fell and clogged the drainage holes. The stench of the dead blood rose pungently, so much so that Mr. Zheng Liu almost vomited several times. After dismantling the corpse, he put everything into a bag to take with him and cleaned up the scene. He scooped up all the bits of flesh and bone from the drain. He also carefully sprinkled lime to disinfect the smell of the blood. It was unclear if Mr. Zheng Liu had ever killed a person before, or only animals, but each of his actions was both decisive and cold-blooded, not unlike a seasoned butcher. Once everything was done, Mr. Zheng Liu put the bag containing the corpse into his car. Fortunately, Sophia weighed just over 30 kg, so it was easy for him to carry. By the time he finished, it was nearly 9 p.m. when he drove away. The security guard did not ask anything. The guard's viewpoint was to mind his own business and let others do whatever they wanted. Mr. Zheng Liu took the corpse to a secluded spot by the river and tossed it in, carefully tying several stones to it. After that, he calmly drove away to get something to eat, as he was quite hungry after all the hard work. The construction site was paused for a few days for many valid reasons, and the workers got a chance to rest for a few days. The security guard had noticed that things hadn't been quite right lately, even though he tried hard not to hear or see anything to maintain his peace. Despite scattering garlic around his small room, it proved ineffective. That night, the sound of knock-knock on the surface of the window mirror woke the guard from his sleep. Outside was a bloodied body, adorned in a red dress, like a bride's gown, with bony hands knocking and scratching at the mirror door. What scared the guard the most was that the corpse had no head, and the dim yellow light cast a more terrifying atmosphere outside. Terrified beyond his tolerance, despite having been on the battlefield before, witnessing numerous horrific deaths, and having seen people blown to pieces, he had never seen a headless body moving like that. The guard was scared like a zombie from the horror movies his grandchildren watched. He knelt down, joined his hands in prayer, and bowed deeply, praying earnestly while repeatedly chanting, Namo Adida Fat. After a while, when he didn't hear any more noises, he dared to crack open his eyes to look up, letting out a sigh of relief, thankful that the chance seemed to have worked. The corpse had left. Just as he was beginning to recover, a loud noise startled him.
Thud.
The bloody body crashed violently into the mirror door, and the head appeared from somewhere, hanging ominously outside, with thick blood oozing from the corners of its eyes. The guard quickly wrapped himself in a blanket, crouching down on the ground, trembling. Melancholic wails echoed, in a language the guard did not understand. Where are my eyes? It's so dark. It hurts, sob. The headless corpse didn't haunt him for long once everything settled down. He cautiously opened the door to check. When he confirmed that it was safe, the guard quickly grabbed his personal belongings and gently opened the door to venture outside. There was no one around anymore, so he opened the gate and took out his dilapidated motorcycle to the street. The engine wouldn't start, so the guard pedaled with all his might, glancing over his shoulder to see if anything would appear again. But no matter how hard he pedaled, it wouldn't start, and he was drenched in sweat. The eerie sounds echoed again. Meow, meow. Just the sound of the cat's meow was enough to send chills down his spine, especially since it was perched on the roof of the guardhouse. Its sleek, black body blended into the dense darkness, illuminated only by its bright eyes like car headlights. If he hadn't heard its meowing, he might have thought it was a ghostly flame. He didn't know where it had come from, or how it could jump up there so quickly. His limbs had been trembling the whole time, sweat soaking his clothes, and he silently cursed. Damn it, this bike usually works fine, but when I need it, it acts up like this. This time, he fumbled for the key and realized he had forgotten to turn it on. As soon as the motorcycle roared to life, he took off, feeling as though his soul had been rescued. After riding for a while, he finally arrived home. His small house nestled in a winding, deep alley where the entire neighborhood had already fallen into slumber. Upon reaching home, he knocked on the door, calling out as he knocked. Serena opened the door, hurry up. Someone inside opened the door, looking sleepy and yawning. Why are you home now? It's only 3 a.m. The guard quickly stepped inside, sitting close to the corner, causing his wife to look at him curiously. Why do you look so dazed? Did you see a ghost? Not a ghost, a demon, dear. What's so horrifying about that? Sit here, I'll tell you. The guard began recounting everything he had encountered. After hearing it, his wife grew scared, and the couple locked the door and went to sleep. That morning, when the director arrived, he found no sign of the guard. The gate was wide open, and the guard room door was also ajar. The project manager, feeling somewhat irritated, took out his phone and called, "Hey, where are you? Why is the gate left wide open like this? I'm not working there anymore. There's a female ghost. It's terrifying." What nonsense are you talking about? This is a huge construction site, and you're talking this way? The guard recounted the whole story to the project manager, then quickly hung up. The project manager was annoyed because finding someone to replace the guard would take a while, so he cursed a few times before putting the phone away. With no one around to oversee things, he had to lock the gate himself. When he approached the guard room, the sight of the red stains on the door left him somewhat shocked. The director reassured himself that these were probably just things fabricated by the guard to justify his quitting. The construction was halted for over a month before work resumed. When the building was nearly finished, Zheng Liu returned to his home country to prepare for the inauguration of the luxury apartment complex. However, upon his return, Zheng Liu was immediately detained for questioning regarding the case of a girl who had gone missing that year. When brought to the investigative agency, Zheng Liu remained calm and recounted everything clearly and coherently. After multiple questioning sessions, without success and lacking legal evidence to convict him, he was released. Upon returning home, he happily went to see his fiancée, who was very worried about him. "How did it go, dear?" "It's fine. I haven't done anything wrong. Don't worry too much." "Then I'm relieved to hear that." Zheng Liu embraced his fiancée. Though she was younger than him, she was the one worthy of accompanying him through life. A few days later, Zheng Liu began experiencing insomnia, as every night he fell into nightmares. Just like tonight, he was sleeping and the clock ticked steadily. Each tick in the silent night felt eerie. Someone was calling his name. Mr. Zheng Liu. Mr. Zheng Liu, help. After hearing it several times, he finally opened his eyes and noticed that the warm yellow light of the bedside lamp had suddenly shifted to red. A cold sensation, as if from the Arctic, enveloped his entire body. The voice echoed throughout the room, making him unable to determine where it was coming from. He could only glance around and stammer, Who is that?" Right after his question, a horrifying laugh rang out, which Zheng Liu had only heard but not seen the source of. He desperately tried to shake his fiancée awake, but no matter how he tried, she slept soundly. The voice of resentment was now close to his ear. "Don't forget me. You killed me. Don't you remember? Leave me alone. Don't look for me. My eyes, where are they? My head, where is my body? Ha!" Mr. Zheng Liu was so scared that he was drenched in sweat, thinking that after killing the girl and burying her eyes, she would not be able to find him and seek revenge. Mr. Zheng Liu fumbled around, glancing up at the ceiling where a mass of long hair was slowly cascading down. He trembled, wanting to close his eyes and not look, but he couldn't. The face of the ghost gradually emerged from the disheveled hair, with two hollow eyes spilling out streams of red liquid, not knowing if they were her tears or blood. Other dismembered parts also started to appear, scattered and gruesome, all as if drawn by a magnet, slowly piecing together into a complete body. The sound of bones cracking echoed loudly. Crack, crack. Suddenly, the ghost's mouth opened wide, and thick, foul sludge from the river poured down onto Mr. Zheng Liu's face in abundance. He felt the slimy, stinking substances flow into his mouth, felt something squirming like maggots in his throat, that sensation also spreading to his eyes and nose. He couldn't scream, only thrashing about many times, until a familiar voice called out, "Honey, are you okay? Honey." His fiancée's voice seemed to pull him out of the muck, and he came to his senses, gasping for breath as he quickly sat up. His forehead was drenched in sweat, his shirt soaked through. He darted his eyes around and quickly swallowed the saliva down his throat. "I'm fine. Just a nightmare. I'm fine." His worried fiancée looked at him anxiously. "Really? Let me get you some water." "Okay, thank you." His fiancée left the bed and quickly brought him a glass of water. Mr. Zheng Liu took it and drank it all at once. The cool water flowed down his throat, washing away the mud he'd imagined. Not long after the water had barely reached his throat, he suddenly sputtered it out, coughing up a lot. His fiancée turned on the light. They looked at each other in horror, and on the floor was a mass of slimy, foul muck in which fat maggots were swimming around happily. The next morning, Mr. Zheng Liu personally went to find the sorcerer to vent his anger. The door was locked, and he began to shake it vigorously, calling out loudly, "You old bastard, come out here. What the hell are you doing?" He called out for a long time, and neighbors who heard the commotion peeked out to see what was happening and told him. "He moved away a long time ago. He's not in there anymore." Do you know where he went? I don't know. Thank you. Mr. Zheng Liu turned and walked back to his car, feeling frustrated, wondering where he could possibly find that old man in this huge city of over 1 billion people. The image from last night made Mr. Zheng Liu too scared to sleep tonight. He had brewed a strong cup of coffee in an attempt to stay awake until dawn. His eyes stared blankly at the ceiling, straining to stay alert, while garlic, knives, and even a statue of Buddha were arranged around his sleeping area. Everything was merely a hope to ward off the demon from last night. But soon, Mr. Zheng Liu fell asleep without realizing it. In the midst of a deep slumber, the sound of a cleaver scraping across the floor jolted him awake with a chilling dread. He quickly sat up, scanning the surroundings. Everything was still calm, with no other sounds present. Mr. Zheng Liu sighed in relief, only to notice that his fiancée Yi was not lying beside him. He called out loudly, "Lin, where are you?" There was no response. The apartment was small with not many rooms, and the space was just large enough for her to hear him. After calling out several more times to no avail, he finally decided to get up and search for her. As his feet touched the ground, he felt something slimy and wet beneath him. Being nearsighted, he reached for his glasses on the bedside table to see clearly and inadvertently turned on the light. When he looked down, Mr. Zheng Liu gasped in horror and jumped back into bed. Beneath him lay Lin's head, severed from her body, the neck gory and mangled. What was even more unsettling was that the head had no eyes, blood seeping from the corners. Instinctively, he glanced around, cradling the Buddha statue in his arms. Though the air conditioning was running, sweat poured down his body. After a few minutes of calming himself, Mr. Zheng Liu dared to peek over the edge of the bed once more, his movements slow and careful. This time, when he looked down, there was nothing beneath the bed. Thankfully, it had just been a trick of the light. A voice called out from outside. It was Lin. "Are you awake now?" "I'm awake. What are you doing out there?" "I have a bit of a stomachache. Come out here with me." "I'm coming." Mr. Zheng Liu felt relieved enough to place the Buddha statue on the bed and set his feet on the floor, ready to step outside. Effed. The lights in the room went out entirely, darkness engulfing the space, with only a scant glimmer from the streetlight streaming through the window. A chill ran down his spine. He wanted to return to the bed rather than venture further. Thump. A cold, clammy hand, more frigid than an ancient iceberg, grasped at his leg and yanked hard. He crashed to the ground, his head striking the floor, and he screamed. Ah! He strained to look, but saw no ghost, just a pair of severed hands gripping his leg and pulling him. He yelled loudly, "Let me go. Someone help me." A chilling, ghastly laughter echoed. "Hey, please spare me. I beg you, spare me." It seemed his pleas had an effect. As the hands vanished and released him, he found himself sprawled on the floor in front of the bathroom, and suddenly the bathroom light flickered on, startling him again. From within emerged a ghoul, its hair matted, dressed in red attire, the very dress he would never forget, even in death. The ghoul moved with difficulty, its limbs and head askew, dragging along a sharp axe. With each slow, dragging step, it left a trail of blood behind, and as it walked, the creature murmured, "Return. My life. It hurts so much." Zheng Liu struggled to crawl back, but he couldn't. His entire body was immobilized. The demon pressed its face closer to him, a face covered with maggots, 2 empty eye sockets with centipedes crawling in and out. "I love you. Why did you kill me?" Two bony, pale hands, marked with black veins, kept stroking his face and hair. Then it removed his glasses, pinched his mouth shut with two fingers, and brought its mouth close to his. Just seeing the maggots and centipedes crawling from its side to his was enough to make him feel nauseous and disgusted. Indeed, those maggot-filled lips pressed against his mouth, and the maggots and centipedes began crawling into his mouth, squirming down his throat. His eyes widened, wanting to push the demon away, wanting to scream, but feeling helpless as he sensed them wriggling down into his stomach, gnawing painfully at his internal organs. Lin's gentle voice called out, "Honey, wake up." It took a while for Zheng Liu to wake up. The first thing he did was rush to the bathroom to vomit. Lin was worried about him and followed, patting his back. "What's wrong with you? Why are you vomiting like that?" He wasn't in a hurry to answer her, trying to vomit everything out first, turning pale and green. But all he brought up was saliva. Zheng Liu paused, gasping for breath, relieved that it was just a nightmare. Lin asked again, "What's going on? Tell me about it." "It's nothing. I just had a nightmare." Lin helped him back inside, pouring him some water and letting him rest. But from the toilet, maggots and centipedes began crawling up from somewhere. For 2 nights, Zheng Liu hadn't slept. He felt exhausted both mentally and physically. Lin was worried and had called medical staff to come to their house to give him an IV. Perhaps, with the additional sedatives, he finally fell into a deep sleep, and he could not remember when he had slept so soundly. Seeing something was wrong, Lin carefully probed, "What's going on? Tell me, I've never seen you like this before." Fearing Lin would worry, Zheng Liu reassured her, "It's nothing. Don't worry. I'm just a bit anxious about the upcoming inauguration of the apartment." "That makes me feel better. Just take care of yourself." "Thank you." Zheng Liu embraced Lin, pulling her close. That night, he took the prescribed sedative and indeed slept well. However, everything he was planning did not align with his expectations, as when the clock struck 2 a.m., everything began again. Knock, knock. The knocking on his door was clear, starting slowly, then gradually quickening. The sedative could not pull him out of this nightmare. The loud knocking woke Zheng Liu up. He opened his eyes and listened, taking in his surroundings. This time, he didn't get out of bed, but remained still, thinking that every time he got out of bed, something happened. He just wanted to stay still, but his small heart felt like it wanted to jump out of his chest. The knocking had ceased, and he felt a moment of relief, thinking that if he just lay still and ignored it, nothing would happen. The knocking had stopped, but it shifted to tapping on the table beneath him. It was getting closer. He tried to remain motionless. Indeed, after a while, the rapping ceased, and Zheng Liu thought if he just let it be, it would leave him alone. Thump! The sound of a heavy and large object falling right beside the bed where he lay, with some kind of liquid splattering onto him, including his face. This time he sat up, wiping himself down, and in his overwhelming fear shook Lin awake. "Lin, wake up, there's a ghost." Lin, still groggy, turned to the side and said, "What ghost? Go back to sleep, brother. I'm serious. There really is a ghost." "Lin." Mr. Zheng Liu glanced around, then looked at Lin, startled, and sprang out of bed, shouting, "Ghost! There's a ghost!" Lin appeared dazed and under some sort of control, suddenly floating in midair, surrounded by axes gradually pointing towards her. You, if you harm her, then spare me." A shrill, maniacal laughter echoed and the axes shifted direction from Lin towards him. The speed changed rapidly, and Mr. Zheng Liu could only raise his hands to defend himself. When everything collided with him, it wasn't sharp axe blades, but the severed body parts of the young girl he had killed. Panicked, he screamed, "Ah, spare me, spare me. I'm sorry, spare me." Lin's voice rang out again. Every time he fell into the nightmare, her voice felt like an angel rescuing him from the depths of hell. "Brother, what's wrong this time?" This time, panic overcame him. He pushed Lin away, clutching his head. "Stay away, spare me. I didn't mean to kill her, spare me." Those words unexpectedly poured out of Mr. Zheng Liu's mouth, leaving Lin quite shocked. Mr. Zheng Liu was taken to the hospital that night in an extreme state of panic, mumbling strange things. When he arrived, the police immediately sought out Lin, who couldn't understand how the police appeared so quickly. "Hello, we are from the investigative police." Lin was surprised and a bit taken aback. "Hello, what do you need from me? We are investigating the recent disappearance of Sophia, and the last person she encountered was Mr. Zheng Liu here. I don't know anything about it, and right now he's not in a good state. We will ask quickly." Saying that, the police entered the room, while Mr. Zheng Liu continued to scream in fear. The doctor told them he has overdosed on sleeping pills, which has led to his unstable mental state. He has also been suffering from insomnia for some time. "All right, thank you, doctor." The doctor left, and the police brought a picture of Sophia to show him. "Do you know this girl?" As soon as he saw Sophia's picture, he became even more frantic, pointing around. She is over there. She's trying to kill me." The police knew that no one else was in the room except for them. They continued to ask, "Where is she now?" Mr. Zheng Liu kept holding his head and screaming, "Spare me. She's dead. Spare me." Then he clung to the police officer, desperately seeking safety. "Save me. She wants to kill me. She's a ghost and still wants to kill me." Seeing his words and actions, the police looked at each other and then left. 2 days later, the police returned to take him for further questioning, but nothing could be done because he was being considered mentally unstable and couldn't be prosecuted. He could only be temporarily detained. Lin, after hearing the story, couldn't believe that her fiancé could do such a thing, but every day she watched each of his actions and words, realizing how frightening he truly was. Sometimes he screamed as if someone was trying to kill him. Other times he described in detail his own murderous actions. She could no longer stay with him and left, as she also couldn't provide any additional information about the girl named Sophia. Essentially, Lin knew nothing about this situation. Mr. Zheng Liu had been detained for over a month now, suffering daily mental torment due to what was called delusions. Lin had not visited him at all after that. At that moment, he was sitting in the dark corner of his cell, his eyes darting around, exhibiting an anxious and fearful demeanor. Then he exclaimed, "They've come. They're back. Please, spare me." He could only see what he saw and hear what he could hear.
Suddenly, he covered his eyes with his hands and screamed,
"Enough. Stop it. Please, stop." Tears and mucus streamed down his face, and then he shouted loudly, pointing forward, "From now on, don't even think about scaring me again." Zheng Liu threw his head back and laughed maniacally, then raised his 2 fingers to poke at his eyes. Blood flowed from the corners of his eyes, and his eyeballs were tossed onto the cold ground. He laughed again. "Don't expect to scare me again." The jailer had now brought the medicine down for Zheng Liu. When the cell door was opened, the jailer stepped back in shock. It took him a few seconds to compose himself before shouting, "Someone has committed suicide. Get over here quickly." Everyone else quickly ran over, all of them horrified. On the ground lay the eyes swarming with fire ants, while Zheng Liu's naked body hung dead in a noose. His clothes were twisted into a weapon, his body slashed in many places, blood seemingly drained from every vein, pooling on the ground. Maggots had gathered around him as if he were a corpse, left for days. That day, no one could explain the bizarre death. Only a rumor spread from cell 13 that the person who died there had been avenged by a vengeful spirit. They believed that the vengeful spirit had to endure torment before dying. The apartment building he constructed was now in operation, transferred to his parents for management. Devastated by the tragic death of their son, they never visited, leaving it to a distant cousin to do as he wished, but the rental income was still sent to them. They described the apartment as 3 incense sticks, lodged directly in the life of its ill-fated owner. The cousin rented it out cheaply, with a supermarket on the ground floor, but gradually fewer tenants came, and the rental price dropped even further. One day, 2 student sisters came to rent a room here because it was cheap, and the apartment was quite new and clean. As they took the elevator up, the older sister asked her younger sister, "Gwen, which floor are we going to?" "We are going to the 3rd floor, Beatrix." "Then why is the elevator going up to the 5th floor?" Gwen looked back at the button she pressed and noticed it had jumped to 5. Just as she was about to press it again, the elevator stopped and opened its doors. The 2 sisters didn't step out but pressed the button for the 3rd floor again. Confident that they had pressed the correct floor, they focused on their phones, but inexplicably, the elevator ascended to the 7th floor. Beatrix told her sister, "The elevator must be broken. Let's just take the stairs. If it goes to the rooftop, it'll be tiring." Gwen muttered, "It's so frustrating that a new and modern apartment building has a broken elevator." "Just endure a bit." The 2 went out to the 7th floor corridor, and then descended the stairs, thankful that they only had 2 suitcases and no extra luggage. It seemed that there were few residents on these floors, making it feel empty. Occasionally, they heard a clink against the stair railing. They quickly made their way down to the 3rd floor, the long corridor stretching endlessly. Only a few people living there. The sound of the wind gusting through the hallway during the day was eerie. Gwen rubbed her arms and commented, "Goodness, if we had to walk here at night, I'd probably wet my pants." Beatrix was also scared, so she urged her sister to hurry. After taking a few more steps, they stood in front of room 30X. The key was inserted and the door opened with a click. Inside was very dark, and they could hear a rustling sound. Gwen quickly grabbed her sister's hand and pulled her to the left. Beatrix, confused, asked, "What are you doing, sis?" "Just stand over here. Let me handle it." Gwen closed the door, then knocked 3 times before opening it again, counting from 1 to 10. Beatrix questioned, "Is that it? What are those strange rituals for?" "I saw it online. They say when you move into a new place, you either bring a dog, a baby, or do this to invite guests out." "You're crazy." "I'm being serious." They both stepped into the room and turned on the switch on the wall. The first sensation was cold. The chill ran down their spines, piercing their brains, making goosebumps rise all over. But that feeling quickly passed as the novelty of the new space set in. They started to clean up and then rest before going out to buy some additional supplies. They stayed there for 2 days, and that night Beatrix had a nightmare, feeling that something truly frightening was lurking. But it was not until the next morning that she mentioned it to her sister. "I had sleep paralysis last night. I felt so tired and struggled to breathe." Gwen, who was cooking instant noodles, teased her. "When haven't you had sleep paralysis? When the guys get on top of you, the ghosts wouldn't dare." "Shut up. I'm single." "Sure, just wait until love comes around and see if you still say that. Just hurry up, eat, then we have to go to school. I know already." Beatrix and Gwen were twins. The younger sister studied painting, while the elder focused on musical theater. Essentially, the two disciplines were somewhat similar. As time went by, rumors began to circulate about this apartment complex, mentioning a legless ghost, a girl in a red dress searching for her body, and a headless demon. The sisters had not encountered anything yet, so they remained unaware of whether others had already experienced something that made them move out. Afterward, Beatrix always felt exhausted. Every time she woke up, she felt dazed, as if her life force had been drained. That night, she did something unusual. While Gwen was deep in slumber, strange noises woke her up. The soft yellow glow of the nightlight barely illuminated the room. She turned her gaze to find her sister. The rustling noise drew her attention to the pillar in the middle of the room. Gwen asked, "Why aren't you sleeping at this hour? What are you doing?" But the mumbling was too unclear for Gwen to understand. "So dark. It hurts. I'm so cold." Those phrases kept repeating, making Gwen irritated as she went over to check, turning on the light. When the light illuminated, she saw her sister with a black plastic bag on her head. She quickly pulled the bag off. "Why are you wearing this at night and not sleeping?" As soon as the bag was removed, Beatrix seemed to wake from a dream and asked her sister, "What are you doing standing here? And why aren't you sleeping? Why were you wearing this?" "I wasn't wearing anything. This plastic bag is right here. I wasn't wearing anything. Let's just go to sleep." Beatrix promptly returned to bed, covering herself with a blanket as if she had no recollection of the bizarre actions she had just performed. Gwen felt somewhat annoyed, but climbed back into bed to continue sleeping. The next night, Beatrix heard the clattering noise again. It was already past 2 a.m., accompanied by the sound of footsteps. Frustrated because she heard it every night, which made her sleep incomplete, she shook her younger sister. Gwen, wake up." "What is it, sis?" "I'm trying to sleep. Tomorrow, let's go upstairs and ask why they keep making noise at this hour. I can't sleep." Gwen replied nonchalantly, "There's no one up there making noise. Are you sleep-talking?" After hearing her sister say that, Beatrix realized something. How could that be possible? Clearly, every night she heard it, and the sound seemed to increase day by day. Not wanting to scare her sister, she said nothing more. 2 days later, Beatrix discussed with her sister, "Let's leave this place. I don't want to stay here anymore." "Why?" "Sis, I think it's fine here. I feel something strange here. I think I see someone." Gwen moved closer to her sister, holding her hand to comfort her, as she knew her sister had some spiritual sensitivity. "Then let's leave. Tomorrow, I'll look for a new place. I'm here with you, so don't be afraid." Beatrix looked at her sister and felt quite reassured. She hated her damned intuition, saying she would look for a new place. But it was somewhat difficult to find a suitable place in this luxurious city. A clean place was too far from the school. Near the school was cramped and hot, and good places had exorbitant prices. That day, after the sisters returned home, exhausted from looking for a room, Beatrix collapsed onto the bed as if she had heat stroke. In this city, The sun was unbearable during the hot season, scorching her to the point of feeling faint and making her not want to eat anything. Gwen said to her sister, "You rest. I'll go cook." "Okay." Gwen went outside to cook, and while cooking, she ran out of gas. She carried 2 small gas canisters downstairs near the apartment to exchange. In the room, after lying down for a while, Beatrix suddenly heard a singing voice, a melodious voice, right nearby. She sat up, leaving her room, and saw a girl in a red dress dancing. The curtains in the room had been torn and hung all over like drapes in an ancient film. Beatrix stammered, Who are you? Why are you in my room?" The girl continued to sing and dance without stopping. Beatrix asked again, "If you don't speak, I'll call security." As soon as she finished speaking, Beatrix turned to look for her phone, but couldn't find it, so she decided to go outside. The door, for some reason, was stuck tight. No matter how she tried to open it, it wouldn't budge, and she began to panic, sweating all over. The singing suddenly stopped, and Beatrix, feeling strange, turned around to look behind her, and indeed, no one was there anymore. She wondered, where did she go? Beatrix glanced around in confusion, and suddenly, when she turned, she encountered a truly terrifying face. 2 hollow eye sockets, a mouth twisted into a grin that stretched from ear to ear, revealing black, skinny bones smeared with some sticky substance. The hair was also matted with something, and Beatrix screamed in fear. The door to the room swung open, and Beatrix stumbled out, calling for help in a weak state, dragging her feet across the floor with a long trail of blood behind her. She desperately cried out, "Help me, someone! Please help me!" But after her agonizing plea for help, Beatrix immediately broke into a maniacal laugh, cackling in a deranged manner. The paper cutter in her hand once again sliced into her own body. "Does it hurt? Does it hurt? Eh?" People in the corridor rushed out to see, but upon witnessing her 2 opposing attitudes, no one dared to approach. With every anguished cry for help, there followed another act of self-harm. If she wasn't possessed by a demon, then she must have been driven to madness. In the end, Beatrix screamed for mercy, begging for her life. But then she took her own hands and gouged her eyes out before collapsing, lying motionless on the floor. At this moment, Gwen was coming back with the gas canisters, muttering angrily about how long the gas man had taken and cursing the elevator for skipping floors. When she arrived, she tossed the 2 gas canisters aside and rushed to embrace her sister. "Sister, what happened to you? Someone call an ambulance." Seeing the terrified expressions on the faces around her, Gwen could not comprehend the horrific events that had just unfolded with her sister. When Beatrix was taken for emergency care, it was confirmed that she had died. Gwen cried a lot, as her sister had shown no signs of depression at all. She stayed in the morgue for a long time before daring to call their parents in the countryside. Alone, she returned to their rental room to gather money for her sister's expenses. When the door opened, Gwen was startled. Strips of fabric were hung throughout the room, severed from curtains and blankets. The floor was marked with bloody footprints, even on the ceiling, and Gwen couldn't understand what had happened to her sister. It was a pity that the people there were too cold-hearted. If they had intervened, Beatrix would not have died in such a bizarre manner. The rumors grew louder each day, but the reality was true. Many people had encountered ghosts here, and they all left quietly. The apartment complex became more deserted and colder. Then a couple in love, consumed by jealousy, saw the young man shoot through the skull of his beloved. When the girl collapsed, shot dead, the young man took his own life with that same wretched bullet. They thought that by living, they could not be together, and dying would mean they could not be separated. But suicide is a crime, and the painful feelings repeat over and over until life comes to an end. And suicide causes the soul to be unable to ascend forever, doomed to wander as a restless spirit at the sight of its own death. This apartment complex, which initially seemed built on a prosperous ley line that would bring the owner wealth and success, turned out to be built on cursed land that invites misfortune. Many tragic deaths haunted this ground. Even if ownership changed or the paint was refreshed, it remained dark and dreary, still filled with strange occurrences. Even passers-by could see the souls of those who had died unjustly here. Dear friends, the story has come to an end. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. If you found this story interesting and helpful, please don't forget to support the narrator and Abyssal Murmurs by hitting like and leaving a comment. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss out on our upcoming captivating videos. Once again, thank you for your attention and support. Goodbye, and see you in the next videos.